So for you American football fans out there, you guys know about Ray Lewis's year 2000 Baltimore Ravens. Now, true American football fans not only know them as the Super Bowl champions that year, but also as having one of the greatest defenses in NFL history. But as many of you guys know, they had an Achilles heel. In fact, it was so bad they went 5 consecutive games without scoring an offensive touchdown. Now, what does any of this have to do with what nobody tells guys about fragrance? Well, in my opinion, the biggest problem when it comes to men and cologne? Well, honestly, gents, it's that most guys don't think it matters. Now, I know this because the stats are that only about 1 in 5 guys wear fragrance on a daily basis. Yet ask those same guys if they're wearing deodorant, most likely the answer is going to be yes. And then when you ask them why, it's because I don't want to smell bad, right? And right there is where I want to make the comparison. Showering, wearing deodorant, that is defense. Wearing a great smell of fragrance is going to get you compliments, get you noticed, turn heads. That is playing offense. Gents, if you consciously choose not to wear fragrance, all the more power to you. But I have a feeling that most men who don't wear cologne are oblivious to the benefits. The next thing no one tells you about fragrance is the lexicon. Seriously, not only is the language of fragrance foreign to most men, but it's also mixed with words from other languages, such as French, Italian, Spanish. Now, to make this really easy for you, I'm going to go over some of the basic terms I think every guy should know. First up, let's go over fragrance concentrations. Now, the least concentrated, as you can see here, is eau fraiche. After that, eau de cologne. Next up, eau de toilette. After that, eau de parfum, and then parfum. Now, understand these percentages of the fragrance oil are general guidelines. The same holds true for how long the fragrance is going to stick around. The reality is there are no regulations when it comes to this wording, and depending on the notes and accords, you could have a parfum that lasts only a couple hours, while an EDT that lasts for 10 plus hours. But in general, parfums are going to be some of the strongest, and by the way, they are also for men. It is not to be confused with perfume, which, by the way, all fragrances are unisex. Seriously, you can wear anything. It's just the marketing team that, makes something geared towards men or women, and there are notes traditionally that the different sexes lean towards. Now, I use the word note. Understand that this is an individual ingredient. It can sometimes be something you're very familiar with, like vanilla, or it can be something maybe you've never heard of, but you definitely smelled, like cologne. Now, accords are a little bit more complex. These are the combinations of notes to get certain smells. So if something has a citrus accord, that could be a combination of the notes bergamot, grapefruit, Italian lemon. And yes, you will see companies get really specific about the type of notes because number one, they know it's good marketing. And number two, if it's a skilled perfumer, they can actually create that difference, which is friggin' amazing. Now, you're often going to see this chart, which talks about top notes, middle notes, base notes. Now, in general, the top note is going to be the first one you smell. The heart note, the middle one, is second. And then the base note is usually the last thing you pick up on a non-linear fragrance. Because yes, there are fragrances that smell the same throughout their life, but a lot of these more complex fragrances, well, the smell is going to change over time. And what we notice usually on the top notes versus the base notes is the timing of the release. Citrus notes are very piercing. You could smell immediately, while notes like woods and vetivers usually sit longer and it will stick around longer. Now, longevity is as it sounds. It's how long the fragrance sticks around. Projection is how far after you apply does the fragrance push itself in a room. And sillage is basically how does the fragrance stick around? If you're going to walk by somebody, does it actually leave a fragrance trail? So with all this newfound knowledge, let me show you how you use it with this example. So right here, I've got Gisada's Titanium. Now that's a lot of notes, but knowing the accords is important because it lets us know what notes dominate, which ones pierce through. The main accords here, no surprise, are going to be vanilla. It's got a nice lavender with woods coming out. Yet with that iris, it is powdery. It is soft. Now longevity on this one is strong. It's beast mode. We're talking 8+ hours. And the sillage, really good. This is strong, which makes sense because it's an eau de parfum and it has a number of sweet, strong notes. Now, what I love about a fragrance like this, because it's got the softness of the iris, yet it's got the sweetness of the vanilla, this can be worn in 4 seasons. It's soft enough to be worn during the day, but you can apply a little bit more and you could wear this throughout the night. And gentlemen, heads up. Gisada is the sponsor of today's video. I've had this fragrance here in my office for a few months. What I appreciate about Gisada's Titanium is that this fragrance is versatile, it's sweet, it's a compliment getter. If you're looking for a fragrance that you can wear out with friends, gents, you'd be hard pressed to find a better fragrance than Gisada's Titanium. Now, if you're looking for something that's a little bit louder, a little bit more in your face, something to wear to the club, check out their Ambassador Intense. Now, unlike the Titanium, the top accord here is not going to be vanilla. No, it's warm, it's spicy, it's sweet, and you've got that amber type of smell to it. I personally find these as very different fragrances. This is going to be the compliment getter. This one is a little bit more masculine, a little bit more, hey, get out of my way. I'm here to have a good time. I mean, if I were to compare it to anything, probably Dior Sauvage Elixir. And if that's too much for you, want something toned down, maybe a little bit more fruity, check out their classic Ambassador. In any case, gents, when you grab a Giussata fragrance, you're going to get great looking packaging. I love that they didn't spare the expense. They used a magnetic cap and they used a really nice atomizer. Use the link in the description of today's video to get the best deal on the web. Now, the next important point that nobody tells guys about fragrances is that there is nothing wrong with natural fragrances and there is nothing wrong with synthetic fragrances. Each of them have their unique advantages and disadvantages. So first up, let's address the elephant in the room. When you think of synthetic fragrances, some guys think that, oh, I don't want anything like that on my skin. Gents, whether a fragrance is made from synthetic or natural materials, neither one makes it dangerous. Now, the reason a lot of perfumers prefer natural fragrance molecules is that they are more complex. As an example, let's take vanilla. Now, as many of you guys know, vanilla comes from a flower. And it's a scent, it's a taste profile that most of us are familiar with and most of us love. But what you may not know is the vast majority of vanilla that is eaten and smelled is actually not natural. Now, they use a variety of synthetic molecules, one of them being vanilla, which when it comes to the molecule structure is a fraction of the size of a vanilla molecule. But for the most part, it replicates the smell and taste of vanilla. However, for the discerning nose, for the discerning taste buds, they can pick up a little bit of a difference. Understand that these natural molecules can be much more complex and therefore much more difficult to replicate. So from a builder, from a manufacturer standpoint, that is a bad thing. Because imagine if you had to go out and build something, but you got a different set of materials each time. Now that may sound great if you're an artist, but if you just want a consistent product, yeah, you can instantly see why synthetics are really nice because you get the same thing again and again. And let's talk price. The price of synthetic molecules much, much lower. In fact, the way they used to harvest a lot of natural molecules, you had to actually destroy the plants. And it used to be that animals were killed for certain natural molecules. So in many ways, the move towards synthetics is much more humane. And let's talk about stability. Whenever you hear about a fragrance going bad, which we'll talk about here in a few minutes, oftentimes they're using natural ingredients. Again, that natural ingredient can create something unique. It can make it more complex. You can get certain smells which are very difficult to replicate, but they'll often go bad much sooner than a synthetic combination that's actually been designed to be more stable, even when exposed to sunlight and temperature differences. Which takes me to my next point of why I never throw out a fragrance box. Seriously, I've got a closet with boxes with over 600 fragrance boxes. Now that's partly because I'm a hoarder, but to fix that, I'm giving away the majority of my fragrances absolutely free in my free group, the Brotherhood of Scent, which I'm linking to down in the description. But how this applies to you? Gents, when you buy a fragrance, keep the box and store the fragrance in the box when you're not using it. In addition, keep that box out of the bathroom and keep it out of your car. Why? Because nothing destroys a fragrance faster than exposure to sunlight and extreme temperature differences. Even fragrances in non-transparent bottles, I would avoid ever putting on a windowsill or leaving in a room or location where the temperature changes 20 to 50 degrees in a day. The reality is light is energy. And what does that do to any item it hits? It excites it, and over time, it changes it. So if you want your fragrance to last, store it in the right place. So what about fragrances and expiration dates? How long does a fragrance actually last? Well, again, that question depends on a few factors. First up, what are the ingredients and is there anything in there that is likely to expire quickly? Next up, has the fragrance been opened and used? The more you use a fragrance, the less of it there is, and that's replaced by air. That air contains oxygen, which oxidizes and reacts with the fragrance oil. And in some cases, if a heavily used bottle is left dormant for a few years, you could have an issue. That being said, gents, I think that this issue is often blown out of proportion. As a guy that's got, like I said, over 600 bottles over the last 5 years, I can't think of a single bottle that has spoiled for me. Now, what about alcohol? And why is it used in the majority of fragrances? So alcohol is the most common diffuser, basically the distributing agent of fragrances that we see in the world. It also protects the fragrance oil and enhances its longevity. Now, there are other diffusers when it comes to fragrances. I've seen water diffusers. This requires an expensive process. It isn't very common, and these fragrances I have heard can spoil quicker. And there's also fragrance oils, fragrance balms in their solid format. So if for some reason you don't want to use any alcohol, know that you do have options out there. That being said, I personally have never had an issue. I know that if you put excessive amounts of fragrance like on your hair, alcohol could dry it out. But gents, I'm no curly fragrance here going crazy with that sprayer. Yeah. Gents, you guys know Michelle is a great friend and I love her opinion, but yeah, Gents, let's talk about overspraying. Everyone has a different opinion, and that's what I find really interesting about fragrances, is there is the science about the formulations, but there's also the art and the fact that you could have, when different batches of fragrances, if anyone follows Creed, you know that every different batch, you've got people saying, oh, it smells different now. The reality is, gents, as I said earlier, there's no regulations on eau de parfum, eau de toilette, how much percentage of oil and how different notes react. You've got some notes that are powerhouses, other ones that are very muted, don't project at all. The thing here that nobody tells guys about fragrances is you need to figure out for yourself how much is too much and how much is enough. Now, my thoughts here is it's better to be discovered than announce yourself.
But Curly, I've heard that fragrance should be discovered, not pronounced.
Do not listen to that nonsense.
I also try to have mercy on the people that, just simply don't like to smell fragrance. They don't want to be overpowered. And gents, I learned this the hard way. A few years back, I was taking my mother-in-law to an eye appointment. And I walk in and have this little old woman after a few minutes look over and say, who in the world is wearing all that perfume? Now, to my defense, I was testing out a whole bunch of fragrances that day, but it is a reminder that you can sometimes wear too much of a fragrance, and you just don't want to choke people out. Now, right with that, one thing that nobody tells you is that you can become what's known as nose blind. And we've all experienced this. You walk into a place and it stinks. And what happens after a little while? You stop smelling the smell. This is called olfactory fatigue. It's actually a defense mechanism in human beings. It's where we normalize smells around us so that we can pick up a unique new smell. Now, the problem when you put on a fragrance is all of a sudden you can't smell it and you think that it's not there anymore. So what do? You reapply when you don't need to. Gents, the best way to figure out if your fragrance is still there is to go out and go for a walk. Get 5 minutes of fresh air, then come back and smell for that fragrance. Yeah, most likely you are going to pick it up anew. Now, speaking of smelling a fragrance on you, when you walk into a store and they give you that little strip to be able to smell it on a piece of paper, that is the worst way to smell a fragrance. All right, I take that back. There are probably worse ways to do it, but that really doesn't tell you anything because a fragrance will react and smell differently on your skin. In fact, depending on your chemistry, depending on what you ate, depending on the dryness of your skin, it could smell different on a different day. And I have to admit, gents, that's again what makes this more of an art than a science. Because you could have twin brothers wear the same fragrance, but depending on what they did, depending on what they ate, depending on the temperature and the humidity, they could actually smell something slightly different. Now, gents, when you're looking for a signature scent, when you're looking for a fragrance that you can own and call your own, I highly recommend that you get a sample or that you just take a chance on a bottle. If that's too adventuresome, go into a box store, smell a number of fragrances, learn a little bit more about it, but don't be afraid to make a mistake. With fragrances, you learn by doing, you learn by wearing, you learn actually that a fragrance maybe initially you didn't like that much, you learn to love. Or maybe something you wore on paper didn't really work for you after you got it. View selecting a fragrance like getting a good meal. You do your homework and research, you get some recommendations, and you try it, you give it a shot. It doesn't always work out, but when it does, you hit the jackpot. Now, what are the tips to make a fragrance last all day? Gents, I got you covered right here. This video, I break out how to make any fragrance last longer. You want that fragrance? Not 12 hours ain't enough. You want 24? Guys, I got you covered. Seriously. Sometimes you buy a fragrance, it's only a couple hours. This, I show you how to find and make sure and apply that fragrance in a way that it lasts longer. So check out this video. Boom, right here.